If you want to create something, a painting that's a little bit looser and a little bit more abstract, then it might be worth trying to paint with palette knives. I love this approach. It gives me a lot more freedom in my painting. So what I'm going to show is just a few basic palette knife strokes. I'm using these Sennelier abstract acrylics. Although it says abstract, you can paint quite representational stuff with them. They're quite clever. They come in pouches, and as you squeeze the paint out of the container, no air is drawn into it, so it doesn't go off. You find sometimes if you buy acrylics in these plastic bottles, after about 6 months it'll go off, and you can usually recognise this because when you squeeze out the paint, it's not smooth and shiny, but it looks a little bit like porridge. It's all sort of lumpy and it's very hard to mix with other colours. So what I'm going to show you is just a few basic palette knife strokes that will help you get started at painting flowers with a palette knife. I'm just going to squeeze the colours out. This is cadmium red hue, primary yellow, and I've got an orange here. I mean, if you didn't want to buy an orange, then you could easily mix these two colours and make a separate pile of orange, but I'm just being a little bit lazy today and squeezing out a third colour. Right, the basic palette knife, I tend to use this teardrop shaped palette knife. As you can see, the handle's quite filthy, but the end of the palette knife, I try and keep it as clean as possible because then it's easier to work with it when you're painting. The other thing you'll notice is the end is dead straight. Sometimes when people work with palette knives, they press really hard onto the surface and that gives it a little curve on the end. And if you can avoid that and keep it dead straight, then it is much easier to use. So here's just a few basic strokes. We spread the paint out. What I can do now, I can do something which is called stacking. So I'm going to put a little bit of yellow. Can you see that? A little tiny strip of yellow on the end of the knife. Then there's a little bit of orange down there at the bottom of the knife. And then I'm going to put quite a bit of red on there as well. So that's got 3 colours stacked onto the knife. What we can do now is we can use this to create the poppy shape. So if I just pull that down. Now, as you can see, as I work that over the surface, the underlying colours tend to just pop out a little bit. As I pull that round, you can see we're starting to get the poppy shape. Don't worry if you can't get the exact shape of the flower head, because later on when we start adding the background, that'll be easier to shape it then. So this is just a matter of getting used to the strokes of the knife. The other thing you have to think about is which side you put the paint. Because I'm going this way, I put paint on the opposite side of the knife. And then just pull that across. So that, very simply, is how you start off your poppy painting. That's the flowers painted in. Now it's time to add in the background. It may seem a little counterintuitive that we're actually putting the background in after the flowers. Normally you would expect to put the flowers on top of the background, but the problem you have with getting the colours to glow is that if you've got a dark background, you put reds over the top, it can look very grey. That's why when I set up the surface initially, I left spaces of white where the poppies are going to go, so the colour would actually shine through. So now it's time to start adding in the background. It is going to be predominantly green, but as you can see, I've got no green here. What I'm basically using are more of the Sennelier abstract acrylics. We've got ultramarine blue, primary yellow. Mix these two colours together and you get quite a dark green. Yellow ochre, again, that tends to make the greens go a little bit grey and dull, so we use that sparingly. And then we've got Azure blue here, which when you mix this with the yellow gives quite strong green. So by combining all these colours together, we can actually develop the background. So I'll just squeeze some colour out first. Again, some people can think it's wasteful working on these flat palettes, but these are ideal for when you're working with palette knives. If you try and squeeze your acrylics into something like a daisy wheel palette, then you're struggling to get your paint out with the palette knife. With this flat surface, you can spread your paint, and it is a much better way of working. So in terms of economy, sometimes if you can try and predict how much paint you're going to use, then not too much gets wasted. If you find you've got acrylic left over after your painting, one of the things you can do is mist it with a water spray, and then just stretch a little bit of cling film over the top, and that'll help to preserve the paint for future use. It'll still keep it soft, but obviously acrylics dry when they come into contact with the atmosphere, so if you can prevent that, it does make them last a little bit longer for their use. So there are my colours, and I'm going to start at the top and work my way down. I shall probably start with the Azure blue and the primary yellow. That gives that lovely green. We can pop that on there. These are heavy body acrylics, so that means that they're more viscous or thicker than sort of standard acrylic. So this does make it a little easier when you're applying paint to the surface. We can keep varying the strength of the mixture, and this will give us these broken marks, which could give you the impression of grasses or foliage in the background of the painting. So I'm just going to keep working through here. I'm working quite quickly. If you work too sedately, then you can have problems with acrylic starting to dry on you, or if you're in a very warm room, this can create similar problems. So I'm going to work quite quickly. If you notice, I'm working quite a small area to start with. If we spread all the way across here, then we're going to have areas where it's going to dry more quickly, and it is going to inhibit our ability to paint in the background. When we get to the poppy heads, I'm basically going to have a little bit of paint on the edge of the palette knife and scrape away from the surface, and that way you can control the shape of the flower head. So here we are now at the final stages of the painting. This is the point where we've done our palette knife work, and we just need to add a few little finishing touches just to complete the work. I'm going to be using a brush now. This is a Melanie Cambridge fine detail brush, and it's designed for working with acrylic paint, so it does work really well. I'm also going to be using a few more colours to do this part of the subject. One of the colours is Mars Black. Another one is Titanium White. Azure Blue, which I've used before. Yellow Ochre. And Cadmium Red Light Hue. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just work on one of these flower heads just to show you what I do to take it just that stage further. So far we've used palette knives and we've not really needed any water, but because we're using a brush now, I have got a tub of water, and I'm going to use that to dilute the paint as I mix it. So the first thing we want to do is create some highlights on the flower heads. So I'm just mixing white and cadmium red, and just put a little bit of a pale edge on some of these petals, so they're just catching the light, and it just helps to define that part of the flower. I'll do this one as well, so we'll do two together. So that's just getting the edges defined. We also need to just look around, just see if there's any patching up we need to do. There's just areas here where the paint hasn't quite overlapped the edge of the petal, and we're seeing a bit of the white canvas showing up through it. So I'm going to just fill that in with a little bit of cadmium red, and that just literally kills the white on the surface. The next thing we have to do is think about the centre of the petal, and I'm just going to put a little bit of dark in here. And again, having this dark centre, it helps to redefine the edge of that petal, because we're putting our darkest dark against one of the lightest parts of the painting. The next thing we need to do is put in some stems. So I'm going to mix up a green, and I'm going to use Azure blue and yellow ochre. This doesn't make a vivid green, it makes more of a subtle green colour. I'm going to add a little bit of white there as well, just so that the stem stands out. We're going to put a stem coming off here. You can do these fine marks with a palette knife, but one of the things you find is when you've applied a palette knife background, the texture is quite rough. So if you're trying to pull a palette knife over a rough surface, you don't get such a fine line as you would if you're working over a smooth surface. So the last thing we need to do now is just add a little bit of dark around the base of the poppy. So I'm going to put a little bit of dark down into that stem. And what I'm basically going to do now is work around the rest of the painting and start to add very similar detail.